You don't want to be here.
I remember the smell before anything else. Not incense, not candle wax. Something wet that pretended to be holy. The kind of wet that remembers names. They sent me north from Baton Rouge before sunrise. Highway 61 turned to a gray ribbon and the radio lost itself to static. I kept it on anyway. The sound filled the car like a prayer I didn't believe in, but wouldn't turn off. Pines leaned in, the shoulders narrowed. Fog began to collect in the low places as if the ground were holding its breath. St. Francisville slid past on my right. A gas station, a church with a paper sign about soup on Wednesdays. Normal things. Then a dirt road without a sign, just a split in the trees and a chain pulled off to one side. I took it. Gravel slapped the undercarriage slow and even. The air changed. Humidity climbed my throat and sat there, heavy as a hand. Belle Quad didn't announce itself. A gate leaned between two posts, white paint gone to ash. Someone had carved a cross into the top board with a pocket knife, not careful, angry. I pushed the gate open. It made a sound that wasn't wood, more like breath leaving a chest. A woman on a porch stopped sweeping. She looked at the collar at my throat. She didn't smile. "You're later than the bell," she said. I didn't answer. The words made sense and didn't, like a hymn heard through a wall. Houses pressed close to a narrow lane, tin roofs, plywood patched with more plywood, windows wearing a film the color of milk. Children drew circles in dirt with sticks and rubbed them out fast as if they'd been caught writing a word they weren't allowed to know. The air smelled like bayou sorrow when it's tired, mud and something sweet that should have rotted weeks ago. Then it came. The bell. Not a church bell, I knew. Too low. Too close to the bones. The first toll moved under my feet, up into my teeth. 1. People stopped where they stood. 2. Knees hit dirt. Not a panic, a muscle memory. 3. A dog slid to its belly and covered its face with its paws. 4. A man with an armload of kindling curled around it like it needed protection. 5. A child reached for a mother's sleeve and the mother wouldn't look down. 6. The woman on the porch dropped her broom and folded her hands without moving her head. 7. I knelt because everyone else did. Because habit has its own theology. Dirt printed itself into my knees. For a second, the sound filled the inside of my skull like light. Then it was gone. Not faded. Gone. People rose as one body. The woman picked up her broom. "First rule," she said, "not to me, not to anyone. When the bell calls, kneel, no matter where you are." I stood. I didn't tell her I knew rules. I didn't tell her rules are supposed to help. I followed the thin thread of smoke that climbed over the roofs, though I couldn't smell any fire. White smoke, not gray. The kind that belongs to breath, not flame. The chapel sat low at the end of the lane, boards dark with years of damp. A white cloth hung in the doorway instead of a door, marked with a small red cross drawn by a hand that shook. I lifted it and stepped inside. Candles, rows of them. Their flames held still, though the air moved across my face like the wings of small, tired birds. A dais stood where an altar should be. Behind it, a figure in white. Veil. Gloves, robe, all the same hue, the way winter is described by people who haven't seen it. No face, no eyes, just the impression of a head and shoulders beneath cloth that clung as if sweat had taught it the shape beneath. "I'm Father Gabriel Marin," I said. My voice felt smaller than the room. "Diocese of Baton Rouge." The figure inclined, slow. The motion made the cloth ripple, as if the body inside had more than one idea about which way to lean. "Welcome," it said. The voice didn't argue with me. It argued with itself. "Here, faith is simple. I was told, you were told enough." A pause. "We keep 7 rules." I waited. The candles produced no smoke. The air tasted metallic, like a coin on the tongue. "You obeyed the first," it said. "When the bell tolls 7, kneel." no matter where you are. The second, never touch the water after midnight. The third, don't speak the names of the dead. They still listen. The fourth, burn your sins on Sundays before dawn. The fifth, if you see white smoke above the chapel, stay inside until it fades. The sixth, don't enter the forest unless the priest summons you. It waited long enough for my breath to sound loud. And the seventh, it said softer, never question the seventh rule. There's a shape to humor. I didn't hear it there. A girl appeared near my shoulder, as if she'd been cut out of the air and pasted close. Small, straight, hands like she'd learned to carry glass without clinking it. Sister Ansel Marie, she said. Her voice held the place where a smile should go. I'll show you the rectory. Outside. The fog had risen from the grass and hovered at the height of a kneecap. White calves moved through it like fish. Boards on porches creaked in a pattern I could have learned if I had the time. The rectory crouched near the trees. 2 rooms, a bed that tilted a little toward the wall. A crucifix hung there, darkened not by age but by smoke that hadn't left a stain anywhere else. Sister Ansel set a bowl and a towel on the table. A small glass vial of water knocked its neck against the bowl like it wanted to climb in. For your hands, she said. I washed in St. Francisville. She nodded, as if I had confessed to something. The road puts new things on you. She left. Silence in places like this is never empty. It's storage. I sat and let it inventory me. Rosary in my pocket, oil on my fingers from a door at the chancery, dust in my cuffs. The bell's last tone shivering in the memory of my bones. I told myself it was ordinary resonance. The body has so many small chambers where sound goes to rest. Night came with wet edges. I lay down and didn't sleep. The house breathed around me. The floor expanded, contracted. Wood has opinions. Somewhere beyond the lane, water made a sound too small for a river and too patient for an animal. A splash, the kind that apologizes for itself. I stood. The door stuck, then gave, wood sighing like a person who'd lost an argument. The fog was thick enough to bend light. I followed the cold, down the path between houses, around a stack of cut pine, past a fire pit filled with ash too white to be honest. The path opened. The bayou waited. Water wore the moon like a bruise. A boy knelt at the edge, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His breath came fast enough to count. He didn't turn when he heard me. He didn't need to. You shouldn't be here, I said, low. I had to, he whispered, so soft the fog took most of it. He asked. I crouched, mud lifted to greet my shoes. Who? He didn't answer. His hands were in the water. He was holding something that wasn't there, or something was holding him. The surface shifted, not a wave, a gathering. A shape rose with the gentleness of a hand on a fevered forehead, fingers that remembered being fingers. They brushed his wrist. He gasped but didn't pull away. The air around us thinned, as if made for someone else's lungs. Let go, I said. I didn't say please. I can't, he breathed. The bell knew before I did. 1. Under the soil, under the boards behind us, the sound traveled and climbed up through our bones. 2. My knees wanted dirt. 3. The boy's shoulders hunched like a man at a grave. 4. The fog pulled tight. 5. I tasted iron. 6. 7. We were already kneeling. The water let him go. He pitched backward, and I caught him. He weighed like a coat on a nail. The heat had left him the way smoke leaves a candle, straight up and unbothered. I held him until the shape of him decided it was air again, and left me with nothing. The surface smoothed. The fog pretended it had never been. I stayed by the bank long enough for the sky to change from black to the color of an old bruise. Birds tried their voices once and gave up. When I walked back, Sister Ansel stood by the chapel door. Her eyes were the color of shut shutters. You heard it, she said. I heard enough, I said. Then you'll understand the morning. They gathered before dawn. Doors opened. People stepped out carrying cloth-wrapped things the size of hands. No one spoke. The bell didn't ring. The rule didn't need it. Inside, the chapel held a colder temperature than outside. Candles were awake already. The white one stood at the dais, veil without a fold out of place. An iron basin sat on the floor, shallow, clean, too clean. Sister Ansel kept to my left. The line formed. One by one, they placed their wrapped offerings into the basin, a lock of hair braided with red thread, a slip of paper folded twice, and then once more, a small string of glass beads, a ring of keys, a photograph turned face down, a bit of cloth that looked like it had been cut from the hem of a dress. The basin received what it was given without the sound metal usually makes. The white one lowered a taper. Flame touched cloth. Smoke rose. Not gray, white. Gentle at first, then thicker. It climbed and spread under the rafters like breath under a blanket. It didn't sting. It smelled like the inside of a cold room where someone had been praying and left just before you came in. Sin burns cleaner than doubt, the white one said. The sentence seemed to come from two places and land in a third. Heads bowed, knees found floor. I stood as long as I could, and then didn't. The smoke shifted without moving. It pushed down. A hand that wasn't a hand. When it cleared, the basin was empty. No ash, no cloth. The metal looked newer than before. Sister Ansel's fingers curled until her knuckles paled and then relaxed, as if she'd rehearsed that gesture and finished it on time. Outside, the fog had climbed into the trees. Sunlight touched the edges of rooftops and left. People went back to their houses with empty hands. They kept their eyes on the ground. It felt like leaving a graveside without flowers to gather. I walked the lanes. Names on doors had been scraped off and written again and scraped off once more. Not erased, removed. Children watched me and then pretended they weren't watching me by staring at the dust with a concentration that had nothing to do with dust. A post near the tree line bore a fresh-cut cross. Wood curls still clung to the wound. Beyond it, the Tunica hills pressed in. Green even now. Damp. Patient. The sixth rule lived there and waited. By afternoon, the rectory had learned my steps. Boards answered in the same places when I crossed the room. I sat with my back to the wall and let the day sift through. The rosary clicked inside my pocket like teeth. I took it out. Let it circle my wrist. Put it away again. I told myself to pray and didn't. Words hid behind other words. Meaning kept a finger to its lips. At dusk, the village drew itself tighter. Doors shut, but not all the way. Curtains moved with a rhythm that didn't match the wind. The chapel drew light from nowhere and held it low, as if the room itself were breathing through a cloth. Confessions waited. A lattice, a kneeler polished by knees that had learned to fold like they were part of the floor. I took my seat. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't say the words I always say. I let the quiet get used to me. Footsteps, a presence on the other side. The wood between us hummed faintly, a tone at the edge of hearing that slides under thinking. A voice, barely above a whisper. I touched the water. How long ago? After 10. Why? He said it was cold. He said my name. The voice slowed. It steadied. Then it stopped, like someone had put a hand on its mouth. I leaned forward. The other side was empty. Only the shape of breath left on the lattice. Another penitent. Shoes too big. Hands that didn't know what to do with themselves. I listened when I should have slept, he said. To what? The bell. What did it say? He swallowed. I heard that. It told me I was early. I should have asked who taught them these confessions. The words had the dull shine of something memorized. Instead, I asked nothing and let the next breath come. Someone knelt. Didn't speak at all. Stayed long enough for the wood to answer their pulse. Stood. Left. The door shut itself quietly, as if not to wake the candles. The last presence of the night didn't kneel. It stood close to the lattice. Cloth shifted, the faintest stir of air, as if a veil considered the idea of moving. The voice was the room's echo of itself. "Tomorrow," it said, "we'll stand where the forest ends." I didn't answer. A no and a yes can sound the same when you keep them behind your teeth. On the walk back, the lane widened into a ditch and narrowed again. A sign leaned into the reeds, bullet holes very carefully knot in the letters. Something white had been painted over an older name, and Belle Croix written in black across the white. Trucks murmured far off on Highway 61. That sound used to comfort me. Tonight, it felt like a promise the world makes to itself, movement for the sake of being somewhere else. I lay down. The rectory breathed. A nail in the wall clicked with the precision of a metronome. I counted the space between clicks and made the numbers mean nothing. I told myself I'd sleep. I told myself I'd leave at dawn and write a letter that said there were other parishes that needed me more. I told myself the smoke was just smoke. The bell didn't answer. Bells don't. They ask. Sometime after midnight, water remembered how to move. I heard it in the same place I'd heard it before. A soft lift, a small fall, the kind of sound a hand makes when it refuses to be called a hand. I stayed in bed. I put my forearm over my eyes and pressed until stars gathered on the inside of my lids. The stars didn't help. I sat up. I stood. I didn't light a lamp. Light makes shadows, and shadows make names. That thought didn't feel like mine. Outside, the air was warmer. The fog had lowered to ankle height and thickened. My steps taught themselves to be careful. The bayou waited where I'd left it, which is not something you can say about water often. I stopped 5 paces from the edge. The surface moved once, in a circle, like a mouth deciding whether to open. A whisper, not in the air, in me. "Father?" I didn't answer it. I tightened my hand around the rosary inside my pocket until the beads pressed their pattern into my palm. I thought of the second rule, the boy's wrists, the way weight leaves. I turned back toward the chapel. The white cloth at the door fluttered, though there was no wind. The morning would come, and the 7th rule would wait where I'd left it, just at the edge of my tongue, just at the edge of what I still believed. The next morning arrived like it was ashamed of itself. No sunrise, just a slow bruising of the clouds until the color bled into everything. I hadn't slept. I'd only been horizontal long enough to make it count as rest on paper. A soft knock, 2 taps, always 2, Sister Ansel's pattern. She stood in the doorway with her hands folded inside her sleeves. "He's waiting," she said. No name. He never needed one. I followed her through air that felt less like humidity and more like someone else's breath. The path bent behind the chapel and dipped toward the tree line. Grass gave way to clay, clay to root. The forest began where the rules started remembering themselves. The white one was already there. He stood at the border where light changed its mind. The veil caught no dirt, no moisture. A man and not a man. Stillness that had practiced. "This is where the forest ends," he said, though the trees only thickened beyond him. Everything past this listens harder. I waited. I've learned that in places built on fear, the silence before instruction is part of the ritual. He turned toward me, or the shape beneath the veil did, and lifted something from under his robe. A bell rope, cut clean, frayed at the ends like something had eaten the sound out of it. "The 7th rule is older than this parish," he said. "Older than the river. It was carried here to rest." He didn't ask if I wanted to hear the rest. He started walking. I followed because that's what I was built to do. The path narrowed until only one of us could walk it. The air grew dense enough to have temperature. The smell a mix of pine, wet leaves, and rusted metal. Every few steps, a cross had been carved into a trunk, some deep, some barely scratching the bark. The further we went, the fresher the cuts looked. He stopped before a hollow. The ground had sunk in a circle wide as a chapel floor. No grass, no roots, only ash. In the center, half buried, a bell. Not brass, not iron. Stone shaped by patience, cracks spread across it like veins. "This one fell," he said, "long ago. The church left it here. The village learned to listen." He stepped closer until his feet met the ash. "When we kneel, we answer. When we burn, we feed it. When we question," he tilted his head as if the veil itself had ears, "it speaks back." The air shifted. A sound, low and layered, like the throat of the earth clearing itself, not loud, felt more than heard, a tone that asked to be recognized. I thought of every church I'd ever stood in, every bell that told me when to start, when to stop, when to pretend to believe. This was older than belief. It found the space between heartbeat and thought and took it. I took a step back. The ash sank under my shoe and whispered a name I didn't know I'd forgotten. He turned toward me. "You understand now?" "I understand fear." He nodded once. "Fear is the first prayer." He reached into the ash and pulled up a small object, smooth, round, the color of old bone. A bead. He held it out. I didn't take it. "Every priest before you left one," he said. "You'll leave yours when it's time." "How many?" "Enough to make the chain." I didn't ask what it was meant to hold. We walked back without speaking. The path looked different going out, shorter but heavier. The fog had started climbing again, filling the spaces between trees until depth stopped existing. When we reached the chapel, he went inside and didn't look back. Sister Ansel waited near the door, eyes fixed on the ground. "You saw it," she said. "Yes?" "What did it ask?" "I'm not sure. It never says the same thing twice." She turned her hands palm up. Fine ash lined the creases like ink. "It listens through us," she whispered. "When we speak, it learns the words." She looked up. "That's why the seventh rule exists, to keep the words from becoming prayers." The rest of the day moved like slow water. Villagers walked the lanes carrying things that didn't need carrying. A man mended a fence that didn't have gaps. A child dropped a stone, picked it up, dropped it again. Repetition as faith. The bell stayed quiet. The quiet learned to ring without it. I spent the afternoon at the rectory table, staring at the bowl of water Sister Ansel had left me. The surface trembled once in a while, though the air was still. Each time, my reflection fractured. Each time, it healed slower. By evening, white smoke began to rise from the chapel roof. Rule 5. Stay inside until it fades. I didn't. Outside, the air was soft, almost forgiving. I followed the smoke to its source, through the cloth door, through the candlelight that leaned away from me, into the room that never decided whether it was a chapel or a wound. The basin was there again, empty. The white one stood behind it, veil pulsing faintly with the rhythm of breathing. The smoke poured from somewhere I couldn't see. It didn't smell like fire. It smelled like endings. He spoke, but not to me. To remember is to feed it. To forget is to starve it. We keep balance. The villagers knelt, heads bowed. Their mouths moved. No sound. The smoke curled between them, slow and purposeful, as if choosing where to linger. One tendril reached toward me. I didn't move. It touched my wrist, cold, then burning, then neither. The rosary in my pocket twitched once, like something alive trying to wake. The veil turned. "Father Gabriel," he said, using my name for the first time. "You're part of the chain now." I left before the smoke finished its sentence. Outside, the fog had thickened to milk. Shapes of houses swelled and collapsed inside it. I walked the lane without knowing which direction I'd chosen. A door creaked open somewhere to my right. A woman's voice, tired and small. "He's listening again." I didn't ask who. At the riverbank, moonlight painted the water silver, but the reflection was black. I crouched, the smell of iron again. The mud pulsed once under my feet, as if a slow heart lived there. I dropped a small pebble. The ripples came back too fast, as if something had been waiting just beneath. I heard the boy's voice from the night before, soft and thin. "It's cold where he is." The water stilled. I stood. I wanted to speak his name, but my mouth wouldn't allow it. The third rule isn't just written, it's installed. Back at the rectory, the door stood open, though I'd closed it. The bowl of water on the table was gone. In its place, a thin layer of ash arranged in the shape of a hand, small, child-sized. I brushed it away without thinking, and underneath the wood was dry and untouched, no stain, no proof. I sat on the edge of the bed until the weight of sitting became another kind of standing. The bell didn't ring that night, but the air vibrated with its absence. Absence can be louder than sound. Somewhere past midnight, a wind moved through the village, not enough to shake leaves, only enough to make doors sigh in their frames. The rosary clicked once, then again. I held it and felt the indentation the beads had left in my palm from before. It matched perfectly. I thought of the boy, of the smoke, of the stone bell half buried in ash. If fear is the first prayer, maybe silence is the second. I didn't sleep. At the first hint of light, the fog began to retreat, sliding back toward the bayou like water finding its old shape. I followed it. The path was different again. More crosses on the posts, more marks on the trees, as if the village had been busy naming what it couldn't forgive. The river waited, flat and gray. I could see my reflection this time. It blinked slower than I did. Sister Ansel's voice came from behind me. "He'll ask you soon," she said. "When the bell calls, he'll want your answer." "What if I don't have one?" She stepped beside me. The fog wrapped her ankles, then let go. "Then it will teach you the question." We stood there until the bell began again, 7 times, each toll lower, closer, heavier. By the last, we were both on our knees, and I realized neither of us remembered deciding to kneel. When it stopped, the air held its breath again. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. The second tolling ended where the first had begun, in the space behind my ribs. The sound folded the air, pressed it flat, then let it rise again. When I stood, Sister Ansel stayed kneeling. Her head was bowed, but her lips were moving, shaping words I couldn't hear. The fog withdrew into the trees. The village exhaled, slow and careful, as if afraid of waking something that had only pretended to sleep. I went back to the rectory. The door groaned in recognition. On the table, the bowl of water had returned. It was full again. The surface carried a faint shimmer, a vibration like a voice caught mid-sentence. I reached toward it. The water trembled, split, and the reflection that stared back wasn't mine. I stepped away and told myself the morning light could do that. That glass, water, faith, they all distort. Outside, the lane was empty. The houses kept their eyes closed. Somewhere behind them, wood split, the sound of an axe or something larger breaking apart. The smell of smoke followed, but no color in the sky changed. When I reached the chapel, the white cloth that served as a door was gone. The interior glowed with an amber light that had no source. The White One stood before the dais, still, almost weightless. His veil hung perfectly vertical. "You've heard it twice," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. He lifted one hand. "After the third, the parish will be clean." "Clean," I said. "From what?" The veil turned slightly. "Doubt?" The word struck harder than it should have. In all my years, I'd never heard it used as a thing that could be burned away. He motioned toward the pews. A dozen villagers waited there already, faces blank, eyes bright as candle wax. Sister Ansel stood among them, her hands folded tight. The White One's voice filled the room again, thin and exact. "Each soul here carries its own echo. You were sent to listen to the last one." I wanted to ask what that meant. I didn't. My throat had turned to wood. He stepped closer. The air bent around him. The light inside the room dimmed, though none of the candles flickered. "Faith is weight," he said. "Too much, and it breaks the spine. Too little, and it leaves the body hollow. You came to measure which we are." He raised his covered head. "Will you stay until the third toll?" I didn't speak, but my silence decided for me. The villagers began to hum, not a melody, a single note, low and steady. It filled the chapel, climbed the walls, sank into the floor. The White One extended his arms as if to receive it. The air thickened with heat. Candles folded inward, their flames bending toward him. He whispered something, and the humming grew louder. Then the bell answered. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound didn't come from the tower. It came from beneath us. The floor trembled. Dust fell from the rafters like snowfall. 4, 5, 6. The villagers dropped to their knees, faces turned toward the ground, still humming. 7. The sound collapsed into itself, leaving silence like a vacuum. The White One lowered his arms. "It is done," he said. I looked around. No one moved. The light had dimmed to the color of ash. The air carried a faint metallic scent, blood or something pretending to be it. Then one of the women began to sway. Her body folded forward, slow, deliberate, until her forehead touched the floor. The man beside her followed. Another after that. Their bodies remained kneeling, but the skin had turned pale, almost translucent. Their mouths still hummed, but there was no breath left to make sound. I stepped forward. "Stop this." The White One tilted his head. "We asked for mercy. This is what it looks like." I grabbed his sleeve. The fabric was wet. It clung to my hand. When I pulled back, my fingers shone with something clear that smelled faintly of salt. He didn't react. The veil fluttered once, though there was no wind. "You still think I'm a man," he said quietly. "That's the last mistake they all make." He reached up. His hands gripped the edge of the veil and lifted. What hung beneath wasn't a face. It was skin without a body, a mask of light stretched too thin. The eyes were empty hollows that moved on their own, blinking not to see but to imitate. The mouth was an opening that had never learned to close. The voice that came out wasn't his. It was mine. Every word I'd spoken since arriving, whispered back with the rhythm of confession. "I came because someone called for help. I saw a boy. I understand fear." Each sentence slid across the room like smoke. The villagers' heads turned toward me, one by one, mouths open, my voice spilling out of theirs. The White One spread his arms wider, and the hum became words. "Father Gabriel Marin," they said together, "you are the bell." I stumbled backward. The floor beneath me pulsed once. The sound began again, deep and slow. It wasn't metal. It was heart. I ran, through the doorless frame, down the lane, past houses that leaned closer as I passed. The fog rose fast to meet me. The ground thumped with every echo of that bell beat. Behind me, the chant followed. Not pursuit, just continuation. The kind of sound that doesn't need distance to reach you. I reached the rectory and slammed the door. The noise didn't stop. The walls shook like ribs under strain. I dropped to my knees, covered my ears, whispered the only prayer that came to mind, the one we're taught as children because it fits inside any terror. It didn't work. The rosary slid from my pocket and rolled across the floor, each bead striking the wood in perfect rhythm with the unseen tolling outside. The final bead stopped at my hand and stayed warm. Then the sound ceased. Silence, wide, unbroken. I waited for breath to come back, and when it did, it wasn't mine. It filled the room like a slow tide. I stood, turned, and saw Sister Ansel in the doorway. Her face looked hollowed, but her eyes still held a human color. "It's done," she said. "What did we do?" She hesitated, and for the first time she looked afraid. "We finished the circle." She stepped closer. The skin on her hands shimmered faintly, like something underneath was learning to shine through. "He needed a voice," she whispered. "You brought one." Her body folded to the floor before I could reach her. The light inside her chest glowed once, then dimmed. The bell didn't ring. It breathed. I left her there and walked outside. The fog had lifted. The air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen. Every house door stood open. Inside each, a candle burned, steady and quiet, no flame moving. I looked toward the chapel. White smoke rose from its roof, not fast, not forced. Calm, like the exhale after prayer. Rule 5, stay inside until it fades. I walked toward it anyway. The interior was empty. No bodies, no sound. Only the veil lying across the dais, folded neatly, clean. The basin shone like a mirror. When I looked down, I didn't see my reflection. I saw the village, streets, roofs, the slow curve of the river, and all of it pulsed in time with a bell I couldn't hear. I picked up the veil. The fabric was warm. It moved once in my hand, like a living thing deciding whether to wake. I set it down again. Behind me, the bell tower's shadow shifted, though the sun hadn't moved. The sound returned, not loud, not even audible. But there, under my skin, inside the breath between heartbeats. They told me fear was the first prayer. Maybe they were right. I left Bellecroix before dawn. The highway was empty. The radio worked again, but every channel hummed the same single note. When I reached Baton Rouge, I parked by the river and sat until light broke the water into pieces. I tried to write my report. The pen wouldn't move. The words wouldn't form. The sound of the bell lived in the silence between each attempt. I folded the blank page and put it in my pocket. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. 7 tolls, always 7. And each time, my knees find the floor before I remember deciding to kneel. I tried to leave the bell behind. That's the lie we tell ourselves about sound, that it belongs to where we heard it. For a while, ordinary noises tried to help. Tires on wet asphalt, the scrape of a chair on tile, the soft, wrong thunder of the Mississippi shouldering the levee like an animal that knows the fence will hold. I let each one stand in for what I refused to name. It worked until it didn't. On the 3rd night back in Baton Rouge, the apartment forgot how to be an apartment. The air cooled without moving. The lamp dimmed without losing power. I set my keys on the table and they didn't make a sound. They lay there like they had always been part of the wood. I said my name out loud just to prove the room could still carry it. The syllables came back slower. Not echo, delay. As if the air were taking time to decide whether to agree. Across the street, a train crossed the trestle bridge. It blew its horn. The horn took a breath first. The breath was the bell. I went to the sink. I turned on the tap. The water shook like a hand trying to steady itself. I filled a glass and set it down. The surface trembled, split into 2 reflections, and joined again. The seam remained, a line across my face that hadn't been there yesterday. Sleep found me in the chair without asking. It wasn't the generous kind. It opened and shut like a trap. I woke to darkness that felt used. The clock's red numbers were stuck at 3:07. My chest hurt the way it does when a dream ends mid-fall. I listened. I always do. The room offered nothing. The nothing had a tone. I packed before dawn. I didn't write a note. The report remained blank inside my pocket. Highway 61 carried me north like a slow river. St. Francisville passed, then Bayou Sarah's smell reached me before the turnoff appeared. The chain on the post lay where I'd left it. The gravel remembered the weight of my car. Bellecroix had not moved. It had only leaned further into itself. The gate sighed my name without deciding whether to welcome me. I walked the lane that had learned my steps. Houses held open doors that had forgotten how to close. Candles stood at attention inside, their flames thin and unbothered. No voices, no children drawing circles. No small arguments between wood and nail. Just the steady absence that places like this call peace. The chapel waited at the end, cloth door hanging perfect and still. White smoke rose and didn't drift. I stepped through. The air changed temperature at my chest like a hand placed there. The dais was bare. The basin shone. The veil lay folded with the care you give to something you intend to wake. Sister Ansel's rosary lay beside it. Not mine, hers. I knew it by the small amber bead near the crucifix, the one that caught light differently. Her voice arrived late, thin as a reed through water. He needed a voice. Not accusation, an obituary for a decision. I picked up the rosary. The beads were warm. The warmth didn't come from my hand. A sound moved under the floor. Not the bell, not yet, something preparatory. Wood adjusting to the idea of becoming part of a throat. The roof sighed as if it had remembered an old ache. I set the rosary down. I don't know why I spoke aloud, maybe to force the room to choose me over itself. "I'm here," I said. The words dropped without a splash. The white one did not stand where I expected him. There was no sudden weight of cloth or change in pressure that meant a body had re-entered a room. There was only the veil and the understanding that clothing keeps a shape even after it forgets the person who taught it. I left the chapel and walked toward the trees. The path began like a sentence that couldn't decide on its subject. Grass, clay, root. Then the line where light changes its mind. The forest didn't move to meet me, but it let me in. Crosses cut into trunks faced the wrong way, toward the heartwood. The cuts looked fresh even when they weren't. I passed the place where the ground sinks, the ash bowl, the stone bell. I didn't step into it. The edge was enough. The edge is always enough for people like me. Silence worked on me the way years do, slow, effective, invisible. My knees found the shape the village taught them. The bell rope the white one had shown me lay half-buried, frayed ends turned into a nest by something small. I pulled it free. The fibers held the smell of old rain and fingers. I didn't ring anything. I answered. It started as pressure on the bones just behind my ears, the place where headaches pretend to be theology. Then the tone gathered itself and found my ribs. A question formed without words. Not, "Who are you?" Not, "Why did you come?" Closer to, "Are you ready to admit it?" I said no with my breath. The bell asked again. The ash shifted. Curls of it rose and fell, as if a hand had passed beneath. I remembered the bowl on my table, the shape of fingers left there, the way it brushed away without stain. I remembered the boy at the water and the way weight leaves an outline. "What do you want?" I asked, which is another way to tell yourself you're in control. A pause, and then the answer that isn't an answer. Need. I reached into my pocket. My rosary rode there, unchanged. The beads had learned my pulse. I closed my hand around it and felt the small ridge each one had pressed into my palm, bead by bead, like a map of a road I'd already taken. "Take something else," I whispered. The bell didn't understand trade. I sat with it until my back ached. I sat until the ash stopped behaving like a living thing and returned to being ash. No revelation, no bargain, only the invitation to kneel again tomorrow and the next day and the next, until the question learned to ask itself through my mouth. When I stood, the forest let me go like a friend who knows you'll return. On the path back, I found another post marked with a knife. New, the curls of wood still clinging. Beneath the cross, someone had carved a date, not past, tomorrow. I rubbed my thumb across it. The numbers didn't smear. They settled deeper. In the village, someone had set chairs in a circle where the road widens, 12 chairs. Only one had dust on it. The dust wore the shape of a man who had risen quickly and forgotten to come back. A child's shoe lay turned on its side by the ditch. Clean. The clean that means water, not care. By the river, the surface did its old trick, black when it should be silver, still when it should be moving. I crouched, the smell of iron again, that bright metal ghost. I spoke without deciding to. "I won't say your name," I said, "but I won't let it be empty." The water tightened. A small wave rolled once toward my hand and withdrew, like a dog that knows and honors the command to stay. Far across the bayou, a heron lifted, beat its wings twice, and turned into mist. I didn't tell anyone I'd returned. There was no one to tell. The sun made a decision, and set without brightness. The lane learned night quickly. In the rectory, the bed still leaned toward the wall. I didn't use it. I sat at the table with my hands around nothing and waited for the bell to decide if I mattered. It waited me out. Then it spoke. Once. The floor gathered its strength and offered the sound to my bones. Twice. The window glass let the tone pass through without complaining. 3, 4, 5, 6. My knees found the plank already worn for them. 7. This time, the silence didn't arrive as a vacuum. It settled like a blanket, warm, heavy, full of a kind of permission I didn't trust. I stood. The door opened without my hand on it. The night had more depth than before, as if the air had been carved to make room for something. I walked the lane. I walked past the chapel and the circle of chairs and the house with the paper Christ pinned too low on the wall. At the gate I stopped. The carved cross on the top board had softened. Not the wood. My eye. Grief will do that to edges. I pressed my palm against the cut. Splinters found old scars. I closed my eyes. I waited for the sound that had made the last of the rules inside me. It didn't come. What came was smaller, a voice I knew because it had learned to borrow mine. "You're part of the chain now. Sometimes truth is the mercy." "I understand," I said. The fog licked the ground and agreed. When morning made a little color, I walked back to the chapel. The veil still lay where I'd left it. The basin held a thin film of water that hadn't been there last night. The surface quivered without breeze. I leaned over it and saw the village again, the roofs, the lane, the white smoke that would rise if asked, and at the edge of the map the line of trees where light changes its mind. The 7th rule waited in my mouth. I didn't speak it. I let it ask me instead. What I answered wasn't an answer. Not no. Not yes. The kind of sound the throat makes when a name is about to be said and isn't. The film broke and joined again. The seam remained. I folded Sister Ansel's rosary into my pocket beside my own. The two crossed each other like arteries. I left the veil on the dais warm under my fingers. I closed the chapel without touching the cloth. Doors remember intent. On the last day, I did what anyone would call foolish. I wrote their names, not out loud, not on paper, in breath. I walked the lanes and I gave each doorway a word I'll never repeat. The house with the broken step. The one with a ribbon of blue paint around the window. The one where a single spoon hung from a nail like a bell too small to be useful. I said what I could and swallowed what I couldn't. The air carried some of it. The soil took the rest. At the river, I found the smallest flat stone I could lift. I made a circle in the mud by pushing it once around my knees. Not big, not perfect. I placed the stone in the center, a token for a boy who'd asked because the cold had learned his name. The water touched the edge of the circle and stopped, obedient as prayer. The sky never decided on blue that day. It wore a color that asked for forgiveness without promising to change. I returned to the rectory and sat. The apartment in Baton Rouge had a chair like this, a table like this, a bowl that remembered how to be a hand when it wanted to scare me. I waited. The bell did not ring. The bell didn't need to. Night came as it should. I closed my eyes and might have slept. I say might, because there are rests that come after acceptance that feel like sleep's honest cousin. Somewhere between two breaths, I heard an old sound used correctly. A whisper, not words, a breath with intention. It didn't come from the forest. It didn't rise from the river. It came from a place people call inside, because we'd rather not admit how thin the walls are. I sat up. I put both rosaries on the table. I crossed my hands over them. I asked the question I knew it wanted. Is there a way to keep what is holy from becoming hungry? For once, no answer came. Silence, clean, not the vacuum kind, the kind you can stand inside without losing your height. I took that as mercy. Before dawn, I stepped out to the lane one last time. The fog kept to the ditches. The chairs in the circle waited like teeth around a mouth. I walked to the gate. The carved cross caught the first weak light. I put my hand there. I let the splinters find me again. I'll come back, I said. The gate exhaled. You know you will, it said back in the only language wood has. Highway 61 took me south. The radio held. The river glared, then softened. I didn't go to the chancery. I didn't write a report. I drove to a small church west of town where the ceiling is low and the air always smells like rain even when it hasn't. I sat in the back where the sound collects. I didn't ask for anyone. I didn't announce myself. The lights were off. The exit sign hummed. The room remembered how to hold trouble without displaying it. I waited there until morning started to happen. When it did, I knelt. I felt the bell at a distance, a pressure change, a long, low yes that didn't require me to reply. I began to speak and stopped. I let the breath go out and didn't chase it. They say faith dies in the dark, I told the empty room, which was less empty than it pretended. Maybe. I put my palms on the worn wood. I felt the grooves left by other hands, other knees. I pressed my voice into them and trusted those old channels to carry it where it needed to go. But tonight I asked without expecting to be answered. I exhaled. I wasn't. The clock in the sacristy clicked into a new minute. Outside, a truck passed. Somewhere far north, a small parish breathed. Behind the walls, a bell rang once, just once, and then the kind of silence that can hold a person upright. I stayed there a long time, long enough for the empty to become usable, long enough to admit I would go back, not to fix what doesn't want fixing, to listen without teaching the question the wrong words. When I finally stood, the floor gave a small sound that wasn't wood. It was breath. I turned toward the door. I took both rosaries with me. I told myself I would carry them until one went quiet. I told myself I would know which that was. The door opened. Morning took the room back without protest. On the threshold, I paused. I thought of the seventh rule. I let it ask me again. My answer was not clever. It wasn't brave. It was only this. I will kneel when I have to. I will stand when I can. I will burn only what refuses to be forgiven, and if the smoke rises white, I will stay inside and wait until it fades. I stepped out. The light was ordinary. The air was only air. Far away, too far to hear and close enough to feel, a parish I can find on any map learned the shape of its next breath. Perhaps grace still lingers somewhere. Maybe not the kind that stops bells. Maybe the kind that teaches you how to listen without losing your name. Somewhere far north, a bell remembered my name.
Seven tolls, always seven.